Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Marty McIntyre, Member Services with the Category Management Association. Appreciate everybody joining us today. You're going to be hearing from Matt Holland this morning with Commercial Leader Shelf Intelligence, Trax Nielsen, and Patty Gregory, Commercial Leader Shelf Intelligence with Nielsen. And you've heard them too at the conference if you attended the conference. But this is the kind of information you would be getting if you attend our conferences. And of course, we asked them to repeat. They had a good round of people that enjoyed the information, so we've asked them to repeat it as well. It's going to be on Elevate Your Shelf Game, and everybody understands all the logistics and the technical and everything that goes along with this. So we hope you get a lot out of this session and you enjoy it as well. Again, if you have any questions, we'll be asking them at the end of the session. You'll just go to the question box and we'll read them out and take them and ask them to the guests. Just real quick before we get started, Category Management Association has an antitrust compliance policy. If you'll take just a quick look at that and we'll get started. A few people still coming in, so if you'll take a quick look at that and get started, we appreciate it. Our next conference, by the way, is going to be earlier this year at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. So if you like that, be ready for another one. I'm going to pass the baton right now, though. Again, everybody appreciate and enjoy this presentation. I'm going to pass the baton right now over to Matt and Patty. Good morning, team. Matt, thank you very much for helping today, and Patty, you as well. And you guys are up.
Thank you so much, Marty. Hopefully everyone can hear me well and see my screen. This is Matt Holland. As Marty mentioned, I'm the commercial leader for the Trax Nielsen solution at Trax, and I'm joined by Patty Gregory from Nielsen, who's the Shelf Intelligence suite leader there. What we really wanted to do today was talk to you a little bit about some of the things that we've learned over the course of the past 9 months to a year as we've launched this new service together. And that's one thing that we should cover off at the beginning. So Trax and Nielsen have formed an alliance to bring really a new service to the industry that allows us now leveraging Trax image recognition technology and Nielsen's access to POS data, an integrated, complete, syndicated, and continuous solution to measure what's happening at shelf and get visibility to shelving conditions, as well as secondary locations and execution in stores, okay, across a number of different banners and channels in the US. We're starting in the United States and actually launching later in a number of countries globally. So what we wanted to show you today was, how some of the clients that we're working with are using this information, this new service, this new capability to elevate their game, right? With the idea that we're leveraging this image recognition platform from Trax, and behind this there is obviously a lot of technology and specifically machine learning to kind of mine data. To understand how best to recognize those products, as well as how best to analyze the data we get back. So as we get started here, we wanted to just kind of talk about really what the state of the industry is today. And as folks know, right, the shelf is finite, right? The number of display locations in a store is finite. And we used to say this is a zero-sum game. Right, there's only so much space on the shelf. If you're taking space from a competitor, if you're taking space, then a competitor is losing. If a competitor is taking space, then you could be losing, right? But the reality is even more stark than this, right? We actually have several thousand fewer stores, right? So over 1,000 fewer stores in kind of the traditional food, drug, mass value world than we had only a couple of years ago. We know that in addition to this, there is a number of new items that continue to be launched on shelf, right? And a lot of these products are not successful, but they take space. And I think the other part of this that's buried in the new item story here is that there is been this ongoing trend for the past several years where you have a lot of new players, a lot of niche, smaller brands and products coming into categories, launching new products, especially in food categories. And they are taking space, shelf space from the bigger brands. So if you're a large brand, you really need to kind of understand what's happening over time as these new entrants come in and how you can kind of defend upon that in space encroachment. And if you're one of the smaller niche players and you're looking to kind of make sure that you can get space on the shelf, you want the data to be able to support that sort of decision in terms of understanding what you add in terms of productivity, unique assortment, and incrementality to that space. And then lastly, we are seeing, even with those existing stores and that existing space, fewer shoppers, fewer trips to the stores than in the past. And we know that's really due to a rise in e-commerce, as well as just a change in shopping habits that's occurring with consumer trends over time, right? So the idea of winning at the shelf is really becoming more challenging than ever. And so, we brought this product to market and launched this product with the idea that you really need better visibility, more continuous insights coming from measuring what's happening at the shelf and understanding that in-store landscape in order to be able to effectively compete in the future. And, in the past we had, if you think about auditing stores, right, it was a manual process, with a hand audit, and there were fragmented data sets, right? So you would get POS data in one place, you have data that's, based on your planogram and what's authorized in the store in another place, and then you might have audit data in another place. Bringing all that data together and integrating it, as well as POS data to understand, how those shelving conditions impact your brand performance was very difficult. It took a long time. You may go out to market and do an audit and actually not get insights for 16 to 20 weeks after that audit had been conducted. And that makes the data really not very fresh in terms of being able to understand what's happening in the most recent time period in the market. And at times, if you go in front of retailers with that kind of information, they might question, right, whether the data is any good because the conditions that you're representing there may not persist on the shelf any longer. And so what we're moving towards with this new technology is really the image recognition platform versus the manual collection. That allows us to get much more fast and efficient with the actual collection in store, which allows us then to do this on a more consistent and continuous basis over time. The other piece is with the partnership with Nielsen, we build in the integration of the POS, right? So this isn't something that clients need to do. The data comes to you in a way that says, here's your share of shelf, here's your share of sales, here's your fair share index, for example. And then the other piece is that idea of continuously fresh data, going out to a representative sample for all major retailers and banners in the US across a number of channels on a monthly basis to get that consistent read, just like you would get for your market share, your most up-to-date pricing, your distribution numbers, et cetera, really is new and revolutionary in terms of a capability in the market, and we believe it's critical to win. And so, really what we're doing here is introducing a new technology solution for an old problem, right? And so how do we provide that continuous visibility? How do we provide those insights in terms of what we can do to win at shelf? And it's about using that image recognition platform to digitize the images, the pictures being taken in the store, right? To get not only that fast and efficient capture, but also a verifiable accuracy. When you have a picture, right, and you can back the data up you have with an image, that insight becomes a lot more bulletproof when you're trying to talk to sales teams, retailers, internal stakeholders about what they need to do differently, especially if you're coming with a bold, new, different insight or something that might be counterintuitive, right? Having that verifiable accuracy is huge. The POS data having built-in integration is big, but also understanding when you have that POS data, what's really driving your sales at shelf, right? Is it the fact that you're a lead-in? Is it the fact that you have a certain kind of blocking configuration? You have a certain number of facings on your key SKUs? These sort of insights are critical to understanding what you might need to do for the next reset, right? And then finally, delivering that in an intuitive set of dashboards that really allows us to kind of visually explore the data and mine that for opportunities. So what we wanted to do then is take you through 4 examples that we pulled together that are massed examples of things that we've worked on with clients who are leveraging this data today, and just some of the kind of unique insights that you can get from the Trax and Nielsen tool. So the first one is all about how do we leverage this now continuous data set to really stay competitive, right, in this evolving landscape. And so I want to show you an example here. So, you know, when you don't go out and do this episodically, right, once or twice per year, but you start looking at the data on a monthly basis, you see things like this, right? And so, and this is an example where, you know, there was a particular brand that really owned a certain segment of a category, right? Had no real, because of a particular unique form and packaging of the product, had no real competition, right? And lo and behold, though, without them knowing, a major competitor actually copied their segment, their product, and entered into the segment for a first time, right, with a major retailer. And the impact was such that overnight, really between 1 month to the next, they lost 10% of the shelf, right? And then on top of that, because that happened during a major reset, right? And then on top of that, there were new items being cut in, right, each month over time. And from that, we were able to understand, okay, there's also this slow erosion, right, of share of shelf in this instance from brand A to these smaller niche products who are coming in. And these products may not even exist in a year, but for now, where you end up with is you start out in January where you basically own the category, and you end up in December in a place that looks very, very different. And this is obviously isn't ideal if you're brand A, and it may not be ideal for the category, right? And so our point about this is, in the past, we really didn't even see this, right? Unless you were doing a very expensive custom project with a company like Nielsen to go out and kind of do a hand audit every single month, you really didn't have this visibility to what might be happening month to month on the shelf in terms of, in this case, your share of shelf and how it might be impacting your sales. And to take this kind of a step further from that example, you know, we work with our partners at Acosta who do the actual collection of the data for us in the stores. And, you know, we started to try to understand, okay, you know, we hear a lot from companies about, you know, my process is designed around, I have 1 or 2 resets per year. And, you know, I'm really focused on these things. You know, this continuous data seems nice to have, but I'm not sure it's really relevant because, you know, the shelf doesn't change that much. This is what we hear. And when we go out and actually take a real category, this is an actual example of an actual reset schedule in 2017 for a category, we see that if you're a manufacturer and you're sitting in a headquarters role in category management, and you're looking out each month at changes to your data, to your sales, to your performance, you may not actually realize that there are 3 or 4 major retailers every single month resetting their shelves, right? And you really don't kind of have a visibility to what this change is unless you're the captain and how it impacts you, and then what it means to performance, right? You don't know exactly when it happened, et cetera. You're kind of on the receiving end of that. If you're a category captain, right, you may be making these changes and you know, have a good idea about what's happened, but maybe not be able to isolate specifically over time then the impact of that. And that's important because another statistic I'll throw out there that it's not on the slide is one of the things we heard from Nielsen at CMA as well is that something like 85% of all resets don't return category growth, right? They actually have 0 impact on sales, okay? And so that is a really stark reminder of the fact that we can get better at this. Another point is if you take this information then and you say, okay, how many stores do each one of these retailers represent for me? And you only look at some major grocery and mass chains. So you convert that calendar file that you just saw over to a number of stores. This is actually the number of stores that are being reset every month across these major retailers. Okay, and this is for a single category. And so if you don't really have that visibility to that monthly data, right, you can't find things like this, right? This is an actual example of a category where they did a reset off season. There wasn't an expectation because of the trend going into this and the overall seasonality of the category. There was not an expectation that that would grow, right? But suddenly we start to see growth, contra-seasonal growth from this category. And what we later found out when we were able to identify is the 2 months in green there were a reset, right? And that reset actually did fundamentally improve sales, right? Along with the number of things that were being done around pricing and promotion. And it occurred off season, right? So in the past, you may not know those green bars were a reset time, and you just might start seeing this, kind of counterintuitive trend that you wouldn't expect, right? And so this is the kind of thing where, we really need to understand much more deeply if we want to become more effective in how we create planograms, how we understand how shelf changes impact our business, that we really need visibility into. So that was kind of staying competitive in an evolving landscape, okay? Just one example. The next is around new product launches. So when we go to launch new products, in addition to making sure that we have a great concept and it's supported well, with marketing and sales efforts, we need to make sure we find space for it on the shelf, right? We want to optimize our placement, and we need to find competitive targets to make a case that we deserve space and we're going to take it away from someone else, especially if you don't want to cannibalize your existing space, right? Which we know a lot of retailers will say, hey, one in, one out, or this is your brand, what else from your brand that you launched last year might go out. And so we had a particular instance where a client was really wanting to get additional incremental share of shelf, and they wanted to do that in a way that actively supported the launch during that critical first 12 weeks of the launch phase, okay? So the first thing we were able to help them with is understanding, their brand might be underspaced today, but which competitors are overspaced based on a simple kind of fair share analysis, right? Share of shelf versus share of sales dollars. Then going down into all that competition's items and seeing there's really some dogs, right, that are just from a SKU productivity or a sales per facing perspective, not really pulling in what is needed in terms of deserving to stay on that shelf, right? Able to identify quickly those competitive targets for new products. Then once the product is actually launched and we can start to understand the impact, then we can start to go in and do things like, what has been the growth in my share of shelf by my key retailers, right? And this is what's on the left. And then when I've grown, right, where have I taken that space from, okay? In this case, looking at kind of the change in share of shelf over time. And then finally, then mixing in and integrating the POS data, we're able to essentially say, okay, what is the value then that this new item launch brings, and how much, where am I getting that incremental space? In this particular case, we were able to say, look, when the new product is there that they had launched, and we found it in the audit, we were able to show actually you did receive incremental share of shelf, yeah? And then once you did, critically, we were able to show that there's a growth story not only for the client's brand, but also for the category. And this information is critical in terms of getting this in time to be able to convince certain retail partners and customers that they need to provide that incremental space you were looking for, right? Because you're going to go to market with a particular strategy and position. In some cases, you're going to be able to sell in that strategy. They're going to give you the incremental space, and others you're not. Wouldn't it be great if during that process you had data to be able to support your strategy to say, here is why, using real data from last month, you should give me incremental space. It's going to grow your category, and here's the proof.
So when we talk about winning at shelf and elevating your shelf game, we're not only talking about the primary shelf. We're also talking about all of those secondary locations in the store where your product may be on display. Industry sources estimate that $37 billion are spent by CPG companies annually on display activity. And clients tell us they're not always quite sure exactly what they get for that investment. Well, it starts with understanding execution. So, did I get on display? But did I get the type of display I was anticipating? Was there the right POS material associated with it? And how does my display presence compare with my key competitors? So having visibility across the entire market and having visibility that is more granular than just was I on display or not. So execution information is great, really helpful, but it's not enough. At the end of the day, we need to make decisions about the kinds of displays that we're going to execute for our brand. And so we can take this a step further and then start to understand not only what percent of stores had the particular display that we had erected, but also what lift to sales resulted from the different displays. With this information, then you can start to calculate ROIs. You can start to make better decisions about what really works and what's worth investing in. In addition to displays, the primary shelf is a huge puzzle for us, right? We need to make decisions about how do we set the shelf? Horizontal flow, vertical flow, how to brand block. All of these things are tremendously complicated. And at the end of the day, how do we know we're making the right choices about how to configure the shelf? With all of the rich data that we can now collect using image recognition and machine learning technology, which enables us to be in more stores more consistently, we're able to layer some analytic modeling on top of this data set to help us solve for and understand what really works. So in this example, we're looking at a bunch of different configurations of the shelf. Things like what's leading the aisle, how are things blocked, what's on the right side, what's on the left side, where is my brand positioned, are we at eye level, etc. And we're able to solve for what's the uplift to our brand when we're configured that way. What's the uplift to the category when we're configured that way? And the idea here is to look for win-win scenarios where you benefit, the category benefits, and you've got a good story to take back about how the shelf should be set to optimize for not only you, but also for the entire category. The other important point here is quantifying the size of prize. So the uplift is an important consideration, but we also need to take into account what percent execution do we already have. There may be relatively more upside to chasing something that has a smaller lift, but a bigger gap in terms of compliance. So understanding which conditions drive optimal sales for the category and for your brand is a great start. The next step is to put all the pieces together and to create something like this. We call this a shelf blueprint. It's essentially a scheme for how the shelf should be organized, which segments need to be respected, what should lead, how should brands be blocked, what should be next to each other, what should be at eye level. All of these important decisions come together into one picture that gives you a roadmap for how to move forward. Along with the roadmap is an estimation of what this is worth. What's the size of the prize for the category? What's the size of the prize for you in pursuing this strategy? We're also extracting principles that come from the analytics directly that give your organization marching orders, key merchandising principles that they can follow when they're making these decisions about how to organize the shelf and what to pursue. Many clients we work with have shelf KPIs that they've established. Some organizations don't yet have them in place. This analytic exercise is a great way to either validate your principles or establish new ones if you don't have them, and have principles that are really grounded and based in the analytics, based in the data. And the great thing is, because there's regular visits to the stores, it's not just about understanding what works, it's also then the discipline of tracking that over time and embedding this into how you run your organization. So today we've talked about different ways you can help elevate your shelf game. It's worth it. If you look at some of the studies that we've done, clients that we've worked with, we see 3 to 5% uplift for clients who are working with us in this way. We thank you for listening today, and we're happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Patty, Matt. And this is why we like you guys presenting right to the point. Great information, a lot of little nuggets to take. But if you've got questions, please ask, and we'll be happy to take them. There is one that came in kind of early on, you guys, and it is who captures these images of the shelf? And in parentheses, if customers, why would they do it?
Yeah, I can take this one, Patty.
Okay.
Yeah, so the images that we're using for this product are actually captured by our partners at Acosta, right? So Acosta has authorization in all the major retailers, and we leverage the folks who are already in the store to capture pictures of both the primary shelf as well as secondary displays.
Okay, thank you. And again, if you've got questions, go to the question box. And what I did notice, two things. There were two notes that I took. That one was right out the gate, Matt. You mentioned that there were 1,000 fewer stores just in the last 2 years. It's a little mind-boggling to get through.
No, the 1,000 fewer stores is versus 8 years ago.
Right.
Yeah, sorry. Last few years, yeah.
Okay. And the other one was 85% resets don't return to growth. I think that is a big thing too.
Yes, absolutely. And again, there's a number of studies that have been done over time between Trax and Nielsen to kind of understand the impact of resets, both in estimating as well as tracking, in market. And yes, it's a pretty stark reminder that we have room to improve here.
Yeah, of always the complex part of shelving. Let's see, how do you ensure the most up-to-date images in your database?
So, we have a global image repository that we've created and update really on a daily basis. We have about 10 billion products that we've recognized that's in that image repository. And we, in addition to kind of leveraging the collection that we do through Acosta and other partners, we also work with clients if there are new products that they're going to be launching to anticipate adding those to our image library and making sure we maintain our the freshness of that information, and we can appropriately recognize when there's packaging changes, free goods or special things kind of marked on the box, etc. So it's both for new items as well as packaging changes that we track that pretty much daily or weekly.
Okay, and there's another question. Can you incorporate sets as designed by retailer to compare against what Trax is capturing?
Yeah, so that's kind of getting to the point of planogram compliance.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a captain, or if you have information about the most predominant set in terms of a planogram configuration, or if you were working with us with store level data, and we could identify a particular store, and you know what planogram should be in that store in terms of the items and configuration authorized, we can compare that to what we would call the realogram, which is the Trax image that we captured in store, and then understand what your level of compliance was, right? Which items were out of place, and what you would need to do to bring that store back into compliance. That's definitely something we do building off of this service.
Got it. And still questions coming in, Matt and Patty. What is a typical hit rate for image recognition, and what is the source of those images?
So as I mentioned, we have our own image repository. So what we do is when we set up a new category for the first time, we go out and what we call hunt images. So we actually go out in the field and start taking pictures and collecting essentially a list of images against all of the individual UPCs that are part of the category definition, either that the client provides us or that Nielsen provides if the client doesn't have it. And then once we have that image repository built, of course, then we send Acosta out to take the pictures of the shelves. The system compares what's in the image library to what's coming through as part of that shelving picture from Acosta, and from there, I'd say typically the industry is actually not very good at that. It's probably around 70%. Trax is at 96% accuracy in terms of image recognition. So that's one of the things that's very different and unique about this solution in terms of being able to ensure that you're getting quality data out the back end, right? We need to have that high level 90% plus of accuracy to make sure that we're capturing all of the items, that we can correctly calculate the KPIs and your share of shelf.
Thank you, Matt. And from that same person, secondly, are you creating a planogram file as an output of the shelf picture?
Yes, that is a service we provide, basically converting the output usually to a PSA file.
Okay, that was easy. Let's see, this one's a little, can the image also captures from the screen grabs of the video camera within the store? Does that make sense? I'm not sure that one's going to make sense to you. Let's go to the next question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm not sure I'm following.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like the whole thing came in clear. How large is your sample size of stores? What is a typical sample in terms of percentage of stores?
So we leverage Nielsen's data science department, who has created their sample. It's part of our partnership here to get information and access to store data. And so we build the sample to be representative of retailer, banner, and state in the United States. And so we're tracking something like 25 major retailers, 50 major banners, and we're visiting over 4,000 stores a month to be able to do this. And that's within food, drug, mass, and value. We also have a C-store sample in which we're tracking up to 2,000 stores a month.
That being a lot of shelving.
Yes.
Matt, we've got more questions for you and Patty. Do you have a degradation rate of compliance over time measure?
So it varies very much, by the category, because some categories have a lot more activity than others. But in general, we track degradation at 10% per week after reset.
More questions regarding comparisons of planograms versus reelograms. Can that be conducted on all stores for a given retailer, or is it only a sample of stores?
So the service is designed to be a sample of stores. We can always augment that and add more if that's what you're seeking. Really, this is something that we didn't design at the outset in terms of reaching more stores, because obviously the costs go up, and we wanted kind of a representative sample. but we know that, from an execution perspective, you need to have more coverage, and we will gladly add more stores and augment our sample for particular client needs.
Okay, I'm trying to make some sense of a couple of these questions. Let me go to hang on. How do you collect the data? I know you take pictures. I think you've kind of been through this, but how do you get the picture?
So the Acosta rep in the store is taking the picture.
Back to that, yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's it. They basically have our app on their mobile device, and then once they snap the pictures, they upload to the cloud, and then we start the processing in terms of digitizing that image. Once that image is digitized, we actually go out and start integrating the data from Nielsen, and then we populate it into our dashboards and deliver it to clients about 20 days after the close of the month.
And I think, Matt, Patty, a lot of people would have this question. How long does it take to get started with a new category?
Yeah, so we started out last year collecting a few categories, proactively, and we continue to do that today. And in addition to that, if you were going to start up a new category, a new subscription with us that we weren't already collecting, it depends on the day of the month, because there's a cutoff date by which we need to make sure that we get the Acosta auditors trained and able to be ready to go into the store for the next month. But essentially, it's about 8 weeks from kind of signature of an agreement to when the client starts seeing data. So it can be very, very quick. But again, it kind of depends on literally the day of the month that signature happens.
Got it. And as we go along, if you've got more questions, keep them coming in. And if you want to contact Matt or Patty, just go through member services, myself, Marty McIntyre, anybody in member services, and we'll get you in contact with them. Let's see. Do you collect multiple locations in the store? I think you've kind of answered that.
Yeah. So we mentioned that we collect displays. But I think it's important, this service is meant to be very complete, right? So we want to collect all appropriate, retailers, in all regions and states. We want to collect all the products in the category. And in addition to that, we also want to collect all the locations in the store, right? So, if you have an end cap, in the front of the end cap, if you have an end cap in the back of the aisle, if you've got an in aisle, freestanding display, if you've got another secondary location over in pharmacy in the front end, et cetera, we're going to capture it, right? That's part of what we do in terms of making sure that we design a new category correctly in terms of the way that the client would like to see it. But the intention of the service is to capture every location in the store the product is stocked.
Got it. And I think, again, a lot of this might have been answered, but how accurate is the image recognition?
Yeah, so we did answer that one before. So 96% accuracy, meaning if there was 100 items on the shelf, the image recognition system will recognize 96 of them.
Okay.
And the remaining 4% is new items and packaging changes that we will basically go out and get new images, and then the next month go back and code those. And so that kind of goes into the 96% for the next month, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's not 100%, but nothing really is. And so we basically go through and make sure that we keep up to date with all those changes that happen each month. And typically that's about 4% of items. Got
it. Thank you. And sometimes we have to revisit the questions. You know how it is. You sit in a room, you don't always hear everything that
Sure.
Soak it in. Let's see, when you're modeling drivers in Shelf Blueprint, how are you taking promotions? Always a good question. How are you taking promotions and other factors into consideration?
Patty, you want to take this one?
Sure. So we do take promotions into consideration, as well as price, as well as other factors like size of store demographics. So we do this with analytic modeling, and we do this because it's really important, obviously, to control for promotions and price changes. We don't want those to affect what we're seeing in the model. So we strip those out. We're left with just the base sales, and then we understand how the different shelf conditions relate to base sales.
Okay, appreciate that. I'm trying to figure out another question. How do you handle situations when the images collected show major levels of OOS?
So because this is a continuous service and we're in that store regularly, and we know from the sales data what should be selling in that store that week, right? When we go back later and process the image and start to combine it with the Nielsen data, we have a good idea of basically which of those items are actually out of stock. And so we have a number of different things that we do to identify what those products are or should be that are in those holes. And so, for example, as I mentioned a minute ago, we do go right continuously to these stores, and so we will know what was in that spot last time we were there. So we'll do a comparison versus kind of the last visit. We'll also do things like, well, you know, if there's a hole in a particular part of the shelf and there's no tag there, for example, we'd have no idea about what should be in that spot. But on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side, and even above and below, it's all the same brand. Then we're going to assign an out of stock for that space to that brand. We may just not be able to identify the individual item. So that we try to identify out of stocks all the way down to the item level. In some cases, that's not possible. But we still make sure that that space is assigned to the category as well as to the appropriate brands or manufacturers, given how the shelf is configured and what was on that shelf during the last visit.
And if I could just add to that, I think one of the tremendous values is that we're capturing the shelf as it is in all its messy glory. So that means if something's out of stock, we're not tending the shelf or fixing it before we take the picture. So what you get back is an accurate representation of what's actually there and unfortunately what's actually not there.
Right.
Because out of stocks has just been such a huge problem for so long. You'd think, you know, we could get that one fixed, but it's always an issue. Another question, what categories are you currently collecting, and how long does it take to get started with a new subscription?
So I think we covered the starting, right? So it's about 8 weeks to get started with a new subscription. And then, you know, there's a list of categories we're collecting. I'm not going to rattle them off now, but I'd be happy to provide them as a follow-up. Okay. But we're in a number of refrigerated and frozen food categories, a few HBA categories as well.
Let's see, and one more thing here, I think, is the Trax Nielsen relationship at the corporate level, or do you also work with customer teams? Good question.
Oh, we're kind of integrated, our organizations. So, you know, obviously we have a corporate alliance, but the reality is day to day, we work on behalf of specific client needs, right?
And at different client organizations, that looks different. So sometimes it's a headquarter as the end user. Sometimes it could be field sales, you know, or, you know, field cap man, for instance. Right. So different constituents within the client. It looks different with every client organization.
And that's just so needed these days. You've got to zig and zag a little bit. You can't do the black and white thing anymore. You guys, I appreciate this information so much. And again, I want to reiterate, if you want to talk to Patty or Matt, please go through Member Services CMA. We'll get you connected. You guys, as always, we love having you on. We love the information, a lot of nuggets, and appreciate you joining us today. Appreciate you presenting. Everybody, thank you for coming to the webinar today.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
You bet.